Yo, back in the studio again with another video that's going to be totally different from the last video that I made, but I don't really care. I'm going to do whatever I want, and that's the only thing I'm going to do. That's why I don't post a lot of videos to begin with. But I don't know if I can blame this on the lack of sleep, but I'm going to say one of the craziest things I've ever said in my life, so don't judge me a little bit here. This morning I saw a Hard Times article that moved me, I guess is the way to put it, so much. The only response that I think I could have was to make a video. And what that article was ranking Paramore's albums from 6 to 1, the 6 albums. I don't want to say worst to best because I don't even like saying any of these albums are bad. I like them all. I was just unhappy with the way they ranked them, but more so just the way that they backed their opinions up. I want to hear everybody's opinions. Tell me what you think, but I want to hear like some actual thought behind it. So hopefully I can do a good job of portraying how these albums relate to me and how I relate to them. And being the huge fan that I am, I have to change into some totally approved merch. I saw this shirt and it reminded me so much of like a gas station NASCAR t-shirt. I had to get it. I don't even know if I'll ever wear it in public. But how could you not buy this? Same on the back. Same on the back. Total, like, I just think of, like, Kevin Harvick being across the front of this or something. I love it. As a matter of fact, now that I think of it, when I got my Amy Winehouse tattoo, most of my friends were surprised that I didn't get Hayley Williams. But that's a different story. But big fan. I'm going to get changed back into something comfortable, and we're going to take this on. Wow, I probably look so dumb. So this album is my least favorite right now, and it's not my least favorite because it's not a pop punk album, and it's not my least favorite because it's different from what was old. It's just my least favorite because I don't think I've really had enough time to break away my mindset of Paramore from what I've known so far to this. It's hard to describe for me, but it's to me it's that different, even from their previous album. And that being said, this is their first album in 6 years. It's also their first consecutive album with the same band. And I'm not trying to point out the obvious and say the band made 2 albums. They've made more than 2. But for the first time, the band they had recording, the members they had recording their last album, are now recording a second consecutive album. So that being said, I think it's important to note that it's the same members because they're changing together. And if we continue to see these people together, I think it'll continue to be refined because as much as Paramore is Hayley Williams, Paramore is still a band, and it was always supposed to be a band from the beginning, even from Hayley's perspective. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but that's always been a constant struggle that I like to say the band, but really Hayley was open about in songwriting was the struggle of the band. Really listening to After Laughter and Hayley Williams' solo project, Pedals for Armor, really points to what this album was going to be. It's a continuous mixture of old things and new things, and then like a blend of them together. Like most Paramore albums, I'll talk about it again, there's like a wide range of things they cover. Some of these albums you can't just listen to and put one genre label on an album. It really just makes me hopeful for the future. Like I'll talk about with another one of their albums, this is kind of another point where I think it's pointing to more change and what more diversity is going to come, even from with their like the remix album. I don't know what they call it, but the like remixes of this album. It's kind of crazy. Why did I just repeat myself and say that twice? Yo, cut that, dog. I'm gonna hand you this dollar. It's kind of strange to me that it came out in the same year as the original release. And it's hard to remember that this album came out in 2023. There's a lot of good music coming out. There's a lot of different things I like. Speaking of which, anybody listening to And Then You Pray For Me? Maybe looking back, I'll have stronger feelings towards it. But right now, I'm still just kind of like middle of the road. One thing they did in that Hard Times article that I liked that I wanted to do here is give a song recommendation and a song skip. The song recommendation I have for this album, trying to go below the singles, but Thick Skull is what I had. I've been listening to that one, and my skip is Time, just because like I like the song, but every time I listen to it, it just reminds me of how annoyed I am by people who make being late their personality. Just let me tell you this, let me be real. If you're late all the time, like you're a serial latist, you're a later, you're not elated, you're an elater. When you're repetitively late, there's no excuse. It's not funny. You're just telling people, hey, I'm late because this is not important to me. And sorry, that was way too serious for a dumb video like this. Skip on to the next one. Number 5 for me is All We Know Is Failing. Their first album, and if I'm honest, it's the only album that I'm less likely to pick up than This Is Why, if that makes sense. Like, I listen to this album the least. And it may be confusing. Like, I really have to be a hater to put this above This Is Why if I listen to it the least. But no, I have my reasons. And this is what I was lacking from that article, my reasons. My reason is this. My opinion on this album is solidified. Like, I know where it stands in their history for me. It's important to me because it's their first album. It takes me back to that era as well, like that time. And in 2005, I was 10, so I didn't have access to this album right away, but I was around. I was active listening to things in that era. I was picking up music where I could, even though I didn't have computer access to obtain things alternatively, I'll say. And I didn't have money to obtain things in the reasonable way either. When I listen to it, the production takes me back. Like, I believe it's 2005. You don't have to tell me when it was made. Like, I hear this and I'm reminded of what MySpace music sounded like, and when everybody tried to make a post-punk band or whatever you want to call it. I'm not doing that. I told myself I wouldn't do that. Whatever you want to call this pop punk. Everybody sounded like this. There was so many bands, and it was huge. It was getting huge. 2005 was like a turning point for me. When I started playing music, I started getting into like hardcore music. Hardcore and punk music was what I loved. And this was one of the first bands for me where I heard them. I was like, wow, that's soft, but I really like it. And I was like, something in me was like, you can't like anything that's not hardcore. That being said, there's nothing really here that really like blew me away. Well, I sound like I'm contradicting myself, but no, it was me hearing something that I liked that I thought I would never like for the first time. That affected me more than anything I heard, like instrumentally. It's a staple of Paramore. Very much fits their sound and pointed to where they were going to go in the future. Like, I feel like any good band builds on that. They release something that's good. There's areas where it's not very polished and it can be a little clunky, but they release it's a proof of concept. One song I have as an example is All We Know. And it's a good example of a song to me where it's good, it's solid, but it's like EP solid. If that song was on album 3, I wouldn't like it very much. And one thing for me is bridges in songs. They can either flow and build to something great and take a song to a next level, or they are just kind of awkward. And this bridge is kind of awkward to me. And then it goes into a breakdown where it reminds me of why I was afraid to like music like this. That guitar breakdown is like it's kind of cringy, to be honest. I'll go on my song recommendation for this album. One of my favorite Paramore songs, even though I said nothing blew me away, it doesn't blow me away, but it's just so solid. I love it. Pressure, it's such a great song. Skip, the song to skip would be Here We Go Again. That one's a little too incomplete for me. Like, I don't know, it just feels shallow, so skip that one. On to the next. Number 4 for me is Paramore, their self-titled album. It came 4 years after the release of Brand New Eyes, and in that 4 years was another patch of struggle. And one thing that I want to mention with this band, and especially with Haley, is in the songwriting, there's few moments where anything is held back. When she opens up and is vulnerable and is writing about things, it's like completely transparent. There's no guessing about what's going on and what she wants to write about. There's not really a mystery. That being said, this album came with some changes in the lineup. Josh Farro was out prior to this album, and it was also the only album without Zach Farro. And it's definitely noticeable. And not in a bad way, not even in a bad way, but it's noticeable. You hear the difference in the writing guitar-wise, and drummers have their own style. I mean, if you play music, you can tell these things, but that doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they're different. There's a lot of good songs on this album, too. There's a lot of songs that I like to go back to. This album is one of those albums that takes you on a ride with the band. The band was changing and growing and like fluctuating in the styles of even music that they wanted to play. And this was not the first time we had seen that, but continued to point more towards going away from the pop punk origins of the band. And I liked that. I thought it was not anything chasing pop music or chasing hits. There are some low points on the album. There are some tracks that I don't care for very much. The deluxe edition makes up for some of those songs that were like lacking to me with more hits, like more upbeat stuff that I really like. Man, I want to give like a bunch of recommendations off this album. Native Tongue off the deluxe edition is great. Daydreaming is a great song. Last Hope is a song that has like a special place for me, one of my favorite songs. But also listen to the isolated vocal recording of Still Into You. That song, hearing the vocals it blows me away every single time. I've watched that video so many times. I watched it twice tonight. It is her in a studio, but it's like a phone 10 years ago in the studio recording her recording. So you hear the song, then you hear her vocals. It's just amazing. But my official song recommendation, I'm going to say Proof. I love that song. It builds great, especially the drums. It's a great example of like how to build drums through a song, even building your fills. The fill coming out of the second chorus is killer. And it's not anything like super complex, but it fits and it builds up to that point. I love it. It blows me away every time. That song blows me away just because I think it's perfect. Skip for me would be Fast in My Car. Not a huge fan of that one. Anyway, we'll move on. So number 3 for me is After Laughter. And like I mentioned earlier, this and number 4 kind of go back and forth for me. My opinions haven't really settled, and because they're so different, I just kind of judge them differently. But I had to be objective. I had to put them in order. And recently I've just been listening to this album more. It's another step further in the direction that they're doing whatever they want to do and trying new things and experimenting and doing things like heavy synth leads, but not in While the Sun Still Sleeps ways. It took me a while to get into this album. And for most of their fans, it's completely unrecognizable to their earlier music, and it was too hard of a break, and a lot of people lost them here. And to me, like, you're not a Paramore fan if you don't like this album, because to me, I listened to it, and although it's so sonically different from their earlier albums, to me it still sounds like Paramore. So even though it was a step in a different direction, I still don't feel it was like a step towards pop music. And it's another album where I don't know, I have a hard time putting a label on what genre this is supposed to be. And I think that's kind of a sign of good music too, when you can't identify it specifically, because then when you do something like that, you make rules on what it has to be. And again, this is another album that was lacking no emotion. There was no holding back. The songwriting, the lyrics, it was very open, and it makes it more relatable, honestly. And that's something that you find in personal relationships. Something that's very scary is being open, but you really find the most freedom when you have an outlet for that and you feel understood. So music that portrays itself as that, and not even portrays, but is that, becomes a comfort zone for me, I guess. So that's kind of why I like ranking this album so high, and I still like listening to it. Yeah, don't sleep on this one. That being said, my recommendation off of this one would be Idol Worship. I like that song a lot. It might be my favorite off this album right now. Like, that one is just an example again of song structure, but drum wise too. I really like the build throughout the whole song on the drums. And the skip for me would be No Friend, just because it's an instrumental. It doesn't build to anything. It's not like lacking a build. It doesn't build to very much. It just kind of drones. And I skip it a lot. I feel like this is going to be a long video, and I didn't realize how much I really had to say. Number 2, here it is. The big one. The one that everybody knows. The one that, for better or for worse, depending on who you ask, defines who Paramore is. Their most recognized album, their most recognized song. But this album by 2021 was certified triple platinum. And we've had the debate on what genre They fall under what you define as pop punk, but for me, capital pop, lowercase punk, this album is the gold standard. Like it's the gold standard. It it proves you don't have to be too serious, you don't have to be too angry. You can be a little shallow, you can be fun. Music is supposed to be fun. Again, doing whatever they want, continuing to evolve from the previous album. This takes me back directly to 2007. It was inescapable at that time. This album was inescapable, and it brings me back to that time, but it isn't dated. That's what separates it from their first album. This is their second album. Their first album, the production was dated, and what's to be expected? They point towards this huge hit, and Hayley Williams becomes the icon that people thought she was going to be, and that the race to make money off of her came in, but it really solidified their role and their importance. Like I said, the gold standard pop punk album to me. It's funny, in my short time of playing in a Paramore tribute band, and by saying that, I'm realizing that I am becoming a Hard Times news article. But in my short time playing with him, we learned every song off this album and even debated we were going to try to do like emo nights and just play this album front to back. And I think that would have been a great idea had Paramore not come back on tour. Either way, I love the music. This is an album for me where I listen to it front to back and just enjoy it. And they were refining their sound, but also in songs like Let the Flames Begin, they were showing the flexibility of what they wanted to do and what they were capable of doing, and like fleshing those ideas out a little bit more. There's still moments where it's shallow. They didn't really tour Misery Business for a long time. Whatever the excuse is, it's just because it was a shallow thing. But moments like Let the Flames Begin show that there's more depth there. Like it was again showing that there was more to come. They could still do more. Hayley Williams could still write more. She could let more out than just being confined to whatever rules were going to be put around her by a record label or by the scene or by other bands, whatever. Like I said, this is a solid album to listen to front to back, and I just love every time I get to hear Crush, Crush, Crush again. That's like another one of my top songs. But my recommendation off this album would be That's What You Get. There's so many I'd like to recommend, but I'm going to leave you with that one. The skip would be Hallelujah, I guess. It's the only really song I skip on that album, even though I still like it. So I don't know why I don't know why I forced myself to do a skip. I'm conforming to the rules that are put on me by the Hard Times. The Hard Times is ruining my life. I really am losing my mind. It's my list. I get to pick which one's my favorite. It's pretty much all there is to it. Get over it. Just kidding. I'll tell you why I like the album. So Brand New Eyes was the third album from Paramore, their follow-up to Riot. And if Riot is the gold standard of pop punk to me, Brand New Eyes is like the death of pop punk in the most respectful way. It's like the ending of that genre. And I know the definitions are loose, and we talked about it, and there's still people claiming pop punk today. There's still pop punk bands out today, but they came in, demolished it. They made the biggest pop punk album ever, and then took everything out with them like the tides. They came in on shore like a freaking hippie, man. Washed right back out. Not even a pop punk album. Why am I dragging myself back into this debate? It's a good album, but this was the last album they would make that sounds like this. They would continue to step further away. And again, not to say I don't like that, but for me, my opinions are solidified. This is my favorite album. This was my favorite album before I even thought of making a list. It's been my favorite album. I don't know why I got super defensive right there. That was really weird. This was also the first time that we saw like real heavy writing around band issues and going deeper in the lyrics, like from previous songs on Riot, where it was still kind of surface level, but it was coming down. This is really where they like clicked, but I think it did what they wanted to do with that sound the best, and it perfected it when it was doing that and put an end to it. And I don't think we'll ever hear an album like this again, and it may not be a bad thing. Like I said, it gets me excited for what more they're going to do. This was the last album to have Josh Farro on guitar, and you can really hear his writing style through this. The riffs, his riff writing makes it more like pop punk style guitar to me. The chord shapes, the chord progressions, the builds, it fits so well. That's part of the aesthetic that brings it more towards pop punk. And I'm still debating on this freaking genre, dude. Why am I doing this? One of the tracks where you can really hear that writing style that I'm talking about is one of my all-time favorite Paramore songs called Feeling Sorry. And another video recommendation. I'll try to link these if I can figure out how to do that. But there's an acoustic version of that live where they're playing it. And I watch that one regularly too. And know that even today, I would be sitting on the floor of that record store singing with everybody else in that video. No shame in my heart at all. I love that song. It's not a downside to this album because when you listen to it front to back in context, it fits. But it's another example where the big hit was an acoustic ballad type song. And I've seen a bunch of albums do that. And my opinion on those is always that there's so much better stuff than the one song that people liked. And it's the only exception. Even when me and my sister saw them earlier this year, they kind of mentioned they haven't toured that song in a while either. And I think it's more the reason like why I don't like it. I think there's just like people have negative connotations because they relate to that song or songs like that so much, and then when those feelings change, like their opinions of that song change. So it's not, I don't know, it's not always a fun song to listen to, and maybe I'm just looking into things too much for myself. I'll talk to my counselor about that, I guess. But still a good song. But I think one of the other reasons why I don't like it is because Misguided Ghosts is such a better song. But Misguided Ghosts is another one of my favorite songs of theirs. Whenever I talk to someone who only knows Only Exception or Misery Business or whatever, and they ask me like what of my favorite songs are, I always suggest that they listen to that one because it's another one where it shows depth, but it also shows I don't know how you would describe it, like scale. It's not a very instrumentally deep song. It's very minimal, but it's still powerful. I really like it. I really like that song. Anybody should listen to that song. And that's why for this album I'm not conforming to the rules. I'm not doing a song suggestion or a skip. Just listen to the whole thing front to back. It's one of the few albums that not just Paramore, but all music that I love front to back and will listen to all the time. 2021, I listened to that album daily. Like literally daily I listened to that album. So I don't see that as me being biased. It's obviously going to be my favorite because I listen to it the most, and I listen to it the most because it's my favorite. So that's my list. Paramore from 6 to 1, not worst to best, because I don't think any of the albums are bad, and I don't like saying that, but just ranked. And there's no wrong answer, but like I said, if you have other opinions, let me know what they are with depth and explanation, and tell me why I'm wrong. Don't just tell me I'm stupid. I know that.